In the spring of 1936, a woman sat in a drawing room at Marlborough House in London and watched her eldest son abdicate the throne of the British Empire on a radio broadcast heard by 200 million people. She did not attend the abdication. She did not go to Fort Belvedere. She did not, in any documented form, attempt in the final weeks of the crisis to speak to Edward in a way that might have changed the outcome, though she had the access and the authority to have tried. She sat in her drawing room. She listened to the broadcast. She wrote in her diary that evening with the measured restraint that her diary entries deployed even for events of catastrophic personal and institutional significance. What she wrote was not about Edward. It was about duty, about the monarchy, about the weight of the institution and the obligation of those born into it to subordinate their personal desires to its requirements. She had been writing versions of the same entry, in one form or another, since she had first understood what the institution required of the people inside it, which was sometime in the early 1890s, when she was a young woman newly arrived in the royal family and beginning to understand the specific terms of the trade she had agreed to. The terms were these: you gave the institution everything: your privacy, your personal expression, your emotional availability to the people who needed it from you, your capacity for the kind of ordinary human warmth that exists outside ceremony and obligation. You gave all of it, and in return the institution gave you position, power, legacy, and a form of permanence that private life could not offer. She accepted the terms. She kept the terms for 70 years. She transmitted the terms to every person she raised through the specific mechanism of making the terms the only available atmosphere, so that the children who grew up inside her household did not learn that emotional suppression was a choice. They learned that it was the condition of existence. The damage that this transmission produced in the people who received it, and the damage that those people then transmitted to the people they raised, and the damage that those people then transmitted to the monarchy that eventually had to manage the accumulated consequences, is the subject of this story. Join me to find out. Victoria, Mary of Teck, was born on the 26th of May, 1867, at Kensington Palace, the daughter of Francis, Duke of Teck, and Princess Mary Adelaide of Cambridge. And the specific circumstances of her early life have been covered in this channel's examination of her marriage to George V in the detail they require. What that examination established, and what this one builds on, is the character that those circumstances produced. A woman of considerable interior life and almost no exterior expression. A woman who had learned, through the financial precarity of her childhood and the social uncertainty of her family's position, that the display of personal feeling was a vulnerability that the world was not reliably kind to. A woman who had constructed, across her girlhood and young womanhood, an armor of composed impenetrability that she wore so consistently that by the time she became queen consort in 1910, most of the people who encountered her in public could not distinguish the armor from the person inside it. This matters for the story that follows, because the armor was not, in the beginning, a choice about parenting. It was a response to circumstances. It was the survival mechanism of a woman who had been taught by experience that emotional exposure was dangerous. The problem was that survival mechanisms do not turn themselves off when the circumstances that produce them change. Mary had built the armor because she needed it. She kept it because she had forgotten or had never learned how to exist without it. And when she had children, she raised them inside the armor, not because she had decided that emotional distance was the right approach to parenting, but because the armor was the only approach she had. The distinction between deliberate coldness and structural incapacity for warmth matters enormously for how you understand what Queen Mary did to her children and what her children subsequently did to theirs. She was not indifferent to them. She loved them, in the way that the surviving correspondence and the testimony of those closest to her consistently confirms, with a genuine and sustained parental feeling that was simply unable to find the forms of expression that children need from the people who love them. That gap, between the love that existed and the expression that did not, is the central fact of Queen Mary as a mother. And it is the fact that the three monarchs she shaped most directly, Edward VIII, George VI, and through George VI his daughter Elizabeth II, were all formed by, in ways that the official record of the British monarchy has spent a century carefully declining to examine with the directness it requires. Mary and George V had 6 children between 1894 and 1905. Edward, Albert, Mary, Henry, George, and John. The household in which those children grew up has been described by their biographers with a consistency of vocabulary that suggests the descriptions are drawing on the same underlying reality: cold, formal, regulated, disciplined, emotionally inaccessible. The coldness was not exclusively Mary's production. George V ran the household with the temperament of a naval officer managing a ship's company, and the specific damage his parenting style produced in his children has been examined in this channel's portrait of the marriage between him and Mary. George was irascible, demanding, constitutionally incapable of the kind of gentle, paternal engagement that his children needed, and that nothing in his own upbringing had equipped him to provide. But George's coldness was a different species from Mary's. George was cold through temperament and through the specific failures of emotional formation that his own childhood had produced. His coldness manifested as anger, as criticism, as the sudden rages that his children feared and his courtiers learned to navigate. It was visible. It was identifiable. It was, in a perverse way, easier for the children to locate and respond to than what their mother offered, because what their mother offered was not a definable temperature at all. Mary was not angry. She was absent in a more fundamental sense. She was present in the room and absent from the relationship, occupying the same physical space as her children without providing the emotional presence that children experience as maternal. She attended their events. She supervised their upbringing. She wrote to them with a regularity that the surviving correspondence documents in extensive detail. She did all the things that a conscientious Victorian mother was expected to do, and she did none of the things that a child experiences as being loved. She did not hold them. She did not sit on floors with them. She did not let them be loud or messy or physically demanding in the way that young children are loud and messy and physically demanding when they feel safe enough to be those things. She did not, by the accounts of any of the children who left records of their childhood, generate the atmosphere of emotional safety that allows a child to develop a secure attachment to the adults responsible for them. The consequences of that absence arrived in the lives of her children at different speeds and in different forms, but they arrived in all of them, and the forms they took shaped not just the individuals, but the institution those individuals were responsible for. Edward was the first child, and the one for whom the gap between what Mary could offer and what he needed was most catastrophically wide. He needed warmth. He needed the specific kind of parental responsiveness that tells a child that their feelings are real and that the person responsible for them is capable of receiving those feelings without being overwhelmed by them. He needed, in the language that developmental psychology would not have available until decades after his childhood was over, a securely attached parent. He did not get one. He got two parents who were, in their different ways, unable to provide what he needed. And he developed the response to that deprivation that children frequently develop when the people responsible for them cannot meet their emotional needs. He sought the warmth elsewhere. He sought it consistently across his entire adult life, in relationships with older women, specifically with women who were already attached to other men, which is the romantic pattern of someone who has learned that love is not reliably available and has adapted to that learning by seeking it in configurations that replicate the original condition of its unavailability. His relationship with Freda Dudley Ward, which lasted through the 1920s. His relationship with Thelma Furness, which preceded Wallis Simpson. His relationship with Wallis herself, which ended the monarchy, All of them followed the same template. All of them were with married women. All of them provided, for periods of varying length, the warmth and the emotional receptiveness that his childhood had not contained. Mary's response to Edward's romantic pattern was the response she gave to most things about her children's emotional lives that required a kind of parental engagement she could not provide. She addressed it through the medium of duty. She wrote to him about obligation, about the throne, about what was expected. She did not, in any document that any biographer has been able to locate, engage with the question of why Edward needed what he needed, what the pattern in his romantic choices suggested about the formation that had produced it, or whether there was anything that she or the institution could offer him that might address the underlying condition rather than managing its symptoms. She could not engage with that question because engaging with it would have required engaging with the question of what her parenting had produced, and that engagement was not available to a woman whose entire character had been constructed around the principle that the examination of painful internal realities was not something that the people inside this institution permitted themselves. Edward abdicated for love. That is the story the broadcast told. The fuller story is that he abdicated because the institution had never given him any other resource for managing the thing he needed most, and by the time Wallace Simpson existed in his life, the thing she provided had become more essential to his functioning than the institution he was being asked to choose over her. Mary watched it happen from a drawing room in Marlborough House and wrote in her diary about duty. She was not wrong about duty. She was simply unable to see what her own performance of duty had cost the man whose choices she was watching with such visible incomprehension. Albert was the second child, and what happened to him was different from what happened to Edward in ways that illuminate the specific unpredictability of parental damage. The same household, the same parents, the same emotional atmosphere. Completely different outcomes, not because the damage was different, but because the person receiving it was different. And because what Albert did with the damage was not Edward's solution of seeking warmth outside the household, but something altogether more interior and more costly. Albert stayed. He stayed inside the institution, inside the household, inside the performance of duty that his mother had constructed as the only available response to everything that required a response. He became George VI. He became the king who gave the wartime speeches and walked the bomb sites and provided the moral leadership that the country needed during its most dangerous years. He became all of those things while stammering, while suffering from the anxiety that his doctors managed across his entire adult life, while carrying, in the lung tissue that the post-mortem would document and the palace would never fully disclose, the physical cost of what the performance of those things across 15 years of kingship that he had never wanted had extracted from his body. Mary's relationship with Albert was, by the accounts of those who observed it and by the surviving correspondence, warmer than her relationship with Edward, in the specific sense that Albert's temperament was less demanding of the kinds of emotional response that Mary could not give. Albert did not push against the armor. He accommodated it, because the alternative was the thing he could not manage, which was the full confrontation with what the armor meant for the person inside it and for the people who needed access to that person. He loved his mother with the complicated love of a person who has never received from a parent what they needed and has never stopped needing it. He resolved the gap between the need and its unavailability by not examining the gap too closely. The correspondence between them is affectionate, careful, and studiously superficial in the specific way that correspondence between people who love each other and cannot talk about what matters tends to be. Mary's letters to Albert during the war are among the most cited documents in the history of the modern monarchy because they contain, in their advice about duty and endurance and the obligation of the crown, the distilled expression of the values she had spent 60 years performing. They are remarkable documents. They are also, when read with the attention that the full context of their relationship demands, the letters of a woman who had one instrument for every occasion and who deployed it on her son across the worst years of his life without, in any form those letters document, asking whether the instrument was the right one for what he was actually experiencing. The instrument was duty. The letter was always about duty. And Albert, who had been raised inside the atmosphere that duty produced and who had absorbed it so completely that it had become his own operating principle, received the letters and went back to work and kept the monarchy functioning, and died at 56 of a body that had been used faster than it should have been. Mary attended his funeral. She did not weep publicly. She was 84 years old, and she had 6 weeks to live herself, and the diary entry she wrote about her son's death is one of the more heartbreaking documents in the royal archive, not because of what it says, but because of what it withholds, which is everything about what it cost her, and the withholding is so complete and so practiced that you cannot tell, reading it, whether the cost was enormous and concealed, or whether the armor had been worn long enough that the person inside it had stopped being distinguishable from its surface. Mary did not raise Elizabeth II. Elizabeth's childhood was shaped primarily by her parents and by her maternal grandmother, Nina Cecilia Bowes-Lyon, whose influence on the formation of the woman who would become the longest reigning monarch in British history has been examined in this channel's portrait of that remarkable and undervalued figure. But Mary's influence on Elizabeth was not therefore absent. It operated through the medium of George VI, who had been formed by Mary and who transmitted the formation to his own children, not by replicating his parents' parenting, but by having absorbed a set of values about duty and emotional restraint and institutional obligation, so deeply that they had become the atmosphere of his household, just as they had been the atmosphere of his. Elizabeth grew up in a household that was, by every account, warmer than the one her father had grown up in. George VI and his wife were genuinely present parents in ways that George V and Mary had not been. They read to their daughters. They played with them. They created a domestic atmosphere that Crawford's memoir, For All the Trouble It Caused the Palace, documents with a warmth that the palace's own official accounts confirm in their essentials. And yet, the values that structured the household were Mary's values, transmitted through George VI with the fidelity of someone who had no alternative framework, because the alternative framework had never been offered to him. Duty over self-expression, restraint over display, institutional obligation over personal desire, the performance of the role as the primary obligation of the person performing it. Elizabeth absorbed those values and built a reign on them that lasted 70 years. The reign was, in its own terms, an extraordinary achievement. The consistency with which she performed the function, the sheer duration and reliability of the performance, the complete absence across 7 decades of the kind of visible personal failing that the institution's critics were always waiting for, is a record that has no comparable parallel in the history of the modern monarchy. It is also a record that was purchased at a price that the official narrative of the reign has never fully accounted for. The price was the same price that Mary had paid, the same price that George VI had paid. The subordination of everything personal to everything institutional, conducted with such completeness and such duration that the person doing the subordinating becomes, over time, genuinely difficult to locate beneath the performance. The public Elizabeth, in her final decades, was a figure of such total institutional absorption that the private Elizabeth had become effectively inaccessible, not just to the public, by the testimony of those who knew her most intimately, to most of the people around her as well. That inaccessibility was Queen Mary's legacy, not intended, not designed, transmitted through the mechanism of an atmosphere that reproduces itself in the children raised inside it, because children learn how to exist from the existence they observe. And what they observed in the household of George V and Queen Mary was a specific form of human existence from which the personal had been so thoroughly removed that its removal had become indistinguishable from the nature of the people who had removed it. The other children deserve their accounting, because the transmission of Mary's formation did not stop with the three who occupied thrones. Princess Mary, the only daughter, married Viscount Lascelles in 1922 and spent her adult life as a royal who was neither the heir nor the spare, but the daughter, which in the monarchy's institutional vocabulary meant a position of perpetual secondary function. She was, by the accounts of those who knew her, a woman of considerable personal warmth and genuine kindness, who had suppressed those qualities so successfully in public that her public persona suggested neither. She died in 1965 at the age of 67, and her obituaries described her with the same vocabulary that Mary's own obituaries would deploy: dignified, dutiful, reserved, which is what the institution calls the people it has most completely absorbed, and which bears no necessary relationship to who those people actually were. Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, lived to 1974 and is remembered primarily for a series of minor diplomatic incidents and for a drinking problem that his biographers treat with varying degrees of candor. What the drinking problem represents, in the context of a man raised in the specific emotional atmosphere of the George V and Mary household, is not difficult to infer. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was the most complicated of the surviving children in the specific sense that he was the one who pushed most visibly against the formation he had received. He pursued relationships, indulged appetites, and exhibited a capacity for personal recklessness that his parents found alternately alarming and incomprehensible, which was the response that parents who have constructed an atmosphere of total emotional suppression tend to produce when one of their children discovers that there are other atmospheres available. He died in a wartime air crash in 1942 at the age of 39. He was the one who had gotten furthest from the formation. He was also the one who paid the most visible price for the attempt. Prince John, the youngest, was removed from the household as a child and died in 1919 at the age of 13. His epilepsy managed in separation from the family that could not accommodate his condition within the institutional image it was maintaining. His story has been told in this channel's examination of the George V and Mary marriage, and the telling does not improve on repetition. He was a child. He was inconvenient. He was managed accordingly. Mary did not speak publicly about John's life or death in any form that has been preserved. The diary entry for the day he died is brief. It records the fact. It expresses something that functions as grief. It does not record what the management of his childhood had cost him or what the cost of that management had been to the mother who had authorized it. She did not record those things because she did not examine those things. The armor did not permit examination of the things that had been paid to maintain it. Queen Mary died on the 24th of March, 1953, at Marlborough House, at the age of 85. She had asked that her death not delay the coronation of her granddaughter, which was scheduled for the 2nd of June. It was not delayed. The obituaries produced by the British press were extraordinary documents of institutional hagiography. They described a queen of unbending dignity, a monument of royal constancy, the fixed point around which 4 reigns had revolved. They described her dedication to the monarchy, her role in preserving its values through the abdication crisis, her personal courage in the face of the 2 world wars, and the accumulated private losses of a long life. They did not describe what the unbending had cost. They did not ask what values exactly she had preserved and what it had meant for the people raised inside those values to carry them across the 20th century. They did not examine the relationship between the monument and the people whose formation had been shaped by standing in its shadow. The examination has been conducted since by the biographers and historians whose work this script draws on throughout. Pope Hennessy's official biography, Kenneth Rose's account of George V, Sarah Bradford's and John Wheeler Bennett's portraits of George VI, Ben Pimlott's biography of Elizabeth II, the work of historians like Carolyn Harris and Anita Singh, who have looked at the royal family's emotional culture with the directness that official biographies tend to avoid. What that body of work shows, assembled and read against each other, is a transmission of formation across 4 generations that the institution has never fully examined, because examination would require acknowledging that the values it considers its greatest strengths are also the mechanisms through which it has consistently damaged the people it requires to perform them. The emotional suppression is not incidental to the monarchy, it is structural. It is the condition that allows an individual to perform the institutional function without the institutional function consuming what remains of the individual in a visible way. It is the armor. Queen Mary did not invent the armor. She received a version of it from her own formation and refined it and wore it so completely and for so long that she became, in the end, the person who transmitted it most purely and most durably to the people whose job it was to govern Britain across the second half of the 20th century. Elizabeth II reigned for 70 years, performing the formation her grandmother had designed. George VI gave his health and his life to a role his mother's formation had made it impossible for him to refuse. Edward VIII walked away from the throne rather than perform a role that the formation had never equipped him to sustain. 3 monarchs, 3 different negotiations with the same inheritance. None of them got out without paying. The institution is still collecting. And the woman who designed the collection system died in a house in London in the spring of 1953, 6 weeks before the coronation of the granddaughter, who would perform her legacy more completely and more durably than anyone she had raised. The coronation went ahead as scheduled, as she had asked. Duty to the end over everything else.